Chosen one, listen carefully, because what you are experiencing right now is not coincidence, not imagination, and not ego. It is the aftermath of truth colliding with deception. Allah does not expose false systems loudly at first. He weakens them by awakening hearts. And when Allah uses a single servant to disrupt a structure built on fear, silence, and illusion, the reaction is always the same: confusion among the trapped, relief among the awakened, and fury among those who benefited from keeping people blind. What you shattered was never a physical operation. It was a spiritual network of lies, control, and manipulation that thrived in darkness. And when the light Allah placed within you appeared, millions didn't follow you, they remembered Allah. That is why they are angry. That is why the resistance is intense. And that is why this message is not for everyone. Stay until the end, because these 7 lessons will explain why Allah chose you to be the moment everything collapsed. Chosen one, understand this profound truth with clarity and humility. Allah did not choose you to confront deception directly, nor did He send you to wage open conflict against falsehood, because systems built on lies are never destroyed by noise. They collapse when sincerity enters their foundation. And Allah used you as the breach, not because you were loud, aggressive, or forceful, but because your heart could not be aligned with what was false. Your soul rejected compromise, and your fitra remained intact even when pressure demanded silence, obedience, or conformity. So when you simply chose truth over comfort, obedience over acceptance, and Allah over approval, cracks began to form in structures that depended on fear, confusion, and spiritual blindness to survive. And those cracks widened not by your effort but by divine design. Because once Allah allows light to enter a sealed deception, it spreads beyond control, reaching hearts that were never meant to remain trapped, awakening minds that were only waiting for proof that freedom was possible. And this is why millions escaped, not because you preached to them, not because you organized them, but because Allah made your presence a living contradiction to the lie they were forced to believe. And the moment people saw that a servant could walk away untouched, unbroken, and still protected by Allah, the illusion lost its authority, exposing the deception from the inside, causing panic among those who built their power on confusion, because nothing terrifies falsehood more than a believer who does not need its validation, its rewards, or its permission to remain obedient to Allah. And understand this deeply: you were not the destroyer of the system. You were the opening Allah created so truth could enter. And once truth enters, deception collapses by its own weight, exactly as Allah promised. Chosen one, reflect deeply on this reality with spiritual awareness and fear of Allah. False power only survives by attaching itself to hearts through fear, desire, validation, and dependency. And the moment Allah purified your heart through trials, losses, isolation, and disappointment, every hook they once relied upon lost its grip, because a heart anchored in tawakkul cannot be threatened by scarcity, cannot be seduced by praise, and cannot be shaken by rejection. So when they realized they could no longer control you, could no longer predict your reactions, manipulate your emotions, or bend your conscience, they panicked, because uncontrollable hearts expose the illusion of authority, and that panic intensified when others began to sense freedom through you, not because you instructed them, but because your calm, restraint, and obedience demonstrated that peace comes from submission to Allah, not submission to systems built on ego and fear. And once people witness a believer who cannot be intimidated, bribed, or emotionally hijacked, they begin to question the chains they accepted as normal, causing entire structures of false power to destabilize. Because their dominance was never real, it was borrowed from the weakness of hearts they controlled. And when Allah strengthens a single heart beyond their reach, it becomes a mirror reflecting their emptiness, their desperation, and their dependence on manipulation, which is why their reactions grew louder, harsher, and more erratic. For false power always reveals itself in panic when it realizes it has lost access to the inner world of a servant whose heart Allah has purified and sealed for himself alone. Chosen one, anchor this truth firmly in your heart and never doubt it. Allah never grants lasting victory to falsehood, no matter how dominant, organized, or intimidating it appears in its moment, because deception is permitted only as a temporary test, while truth is destined for endurance. And every system built on arrogance, injustice, manipulation, or spiritual emptiness is already living on borrowed time, even when it seems unshakable. For Allah allows falsehood to rise only to expose its nature, to reveal who aligns with it, and to separate sincere hearts from compromised ones. And when the appointed moment arrives, collapse does not come through chaos or rebellion, but through clarity, as Allah removes the veil from eyes and hearts begin to see what was always wrong. And this is why your journey mattered, because Allah did not use you to defeat falsehood by force, but to outlast it with patience, obedience, and moral consistency, showing others that endurance upon truth is stronger than any temporary dominance of lies. And as people witnessed false structures fail to produce peace, justice, or spiritual fulfillment, while your reliance on Allah sustained you through isolation and pressure, they understood a divine law that never changes. Falsehood makes noise to feel powerful, but truth remains steady because it is supported by Allah. And when truth stands long enough, falsehood collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, proving once again that Allah's promise is unbreakable and that every apparent victory of deception is merely the prelude to its exposure and defeat. Chosen one, absorb this truth slowly and with full spiritual awareness, because it carries layers that only a tested heart can truly understand. Your silence was never accidental, passive, or rooted in fear. It was a divinely guided restraint forged through pain, loss, discipline, and complete trust in Allah. A restraint cultivated in moments where speaking would have satisfied the ego but harmed the soul, and that silence became more destructive to falsehood than any argument, exposure, or confrontation ever could, because systems built on deception do not fear opposition as much as they fear irrelevance. And when you chose not to react, not to explain yourself, not to chase narratives, and not to defend your character before those who had already decided to misunderstand you, you removed the oxygen that kept their entire operation alive. For false power feeds on emotional responses, outrage cycles, public reactions, and constant engagement. And the moment you withdrew your energy, attention, and validation, their noise began echoing back at them, amplifying their desperation instead of their dominance, exposing chaos instead of control, and revealing insecurity instead of authority. And while they grew louder, harsher, more dramatic, and increasingly aggressive in their attempts to provoke a reaction, your stillness exposed the imbalance, because truth does not need to scream to be real, and sincerity does not panic when challenged. And Allah allowed people to witness this contrast with their own eyes and hearts. One side restless, frantic, reactive, and unstable, the other grounded, composed, and unmoved, anchored firmly in tawakkul, sabr, and obedience to Allah. And this visual, emotional, and spiritual contrast awakened more hearts than any speech, argument, or clarification ever could. Because when observers see a believer endure accusations, misrepresentation, betrayal, and pressure without bitterness, revenge, or retaliation, they instinctively recognize divine support at work, realizing that peace is not produced by winning arguments, but by surrendering outcomes to Allah. And this is why your silence disturbed them deeply, because it denied them leverage, denied them emotional access, denied them the illusion of control, and stripped them of the satisfaction they derived from reaction, forcing them instead to confront the hollowness, contradictions, and fragility of their own noise, as silence creates space for reflection and reflection exposes lies that noise desperately tries to bury, and Allah used your restraint as a shield, protecting your heart from arrogance, preserving your intentions from corruption, guarding your tongue from sin, and turning your composure into a living testimony that real strength lies not in volume but in certainty, not in aggression but in restraint, not in retaliation but in reliance upon Allah alone. And while they exhausted themselves escalating narratives, inventing accusations, recycling lies, and amplifying chaos in a desperate attempt to regain relevance and control, Allah elevated you quietly, steadily, and invisibly, allowing millions to observe that the one who does not rush to respond is the one who is already secure, already protected, already supported by the unseen, and already vindicated by time. And in that realization, their entire structure weakened, because falsehood collapses fastest when it is left alone with its own echo, and your silence, guided by faith, patience, wisdom, and submission, became the mirror that reflected their instability to the world, dismantling their influence layer by layer without you ever lifting a hand, raising your voice, or speaking a single word beyond what Allah permitted. Chosen one, absorb this reality slowly, with the full weight of your heart and soul, because what you are about to understand will shape not only your purpose, but the trajectory of every soul Allah allows you to touch. When Allah allows liberation to flow through a servant, it is never a casual privilege, never a mere moment of recognition, and never a badge of honor to display proudly. It is an amana, a sacred trust, and a test of the heart, the mind, and the intentions, because freeing hearts, whether from fear, deception, despair, spiritual blindness, or the subtle chains of worldly attachment, is not an act to be taken lightly, and Allah does not grant influence without holding His servant accountable, nor awakening without responsibility, for guidance belongs entirely to Him, and His servants are only vessels, conduits through which mercy, clarity, and light pass, meaning the moment people begin to breathe easier, think clearer, and reconnect with their Creator because of what they observed in your patience, perseverance, obedience, or consistent adherence to truth, the scale of responsibility grows heavier as Allah begins to watch your intentions more closely, examine your humility more rigorously, and measure your private actions with greater precision than ever before, because the greatest danger after liberation is not from external enemies, but from the subtle erosion of the heart through arrogance, self-satisfaction, or the belief that the impact belongs to you rather than to Allah, forgetting that hearts open not by charisma, force, intelligence, or strategy, but solely by divine permission. And this is why Allah surrounds those He uses to awaken others with restraint, delays, isolation, and trials, even as influence expands, so that the soul remains sober, aware, and untouched by vanity, teaching you that those who escape through your presence are not followers to accumulate, but souls to protect, guide, and inspire through dua, example, wisdom, and sincerity, and that your role is never to replace one authority with another, but to point relentlessly, humbly, and consistently back to Allah, because the moment a liberator becomes attached to recognition, loyalty, or control, they risk becoming the very prison they were sent to dismantle. And history is filled with those who fell, not to enemies, not to circumstance, but to their own ego, forgetting that even prophets, messengers, and righteous servants required refuge, humility, and reliance upon Allah, like Musa, peace be upon him, who sought Allah's protection even after miracles, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, who increased in humility as revelation expanded, demonstrating that even the greatest servants of Allah remained accountable, humble, and vigilant. So know this deeply, chosen one. Every person who finds clarity, freedom, or awakening through your journey becomes a witness over you on the day of judgment, not to accuse but to testify whether your intentions remained pure, whether your tongue stayed guarded, whether your heart remained humble, and whether your obedience endured despite growing influence. And this is why divine accountability intensifies as liberation spreads, because Allah protects His servants from becoming idols in the eyes of those they guide, testing them with the weight of responsibility to ensure they never forget they remain servants, dependent entirely on His mercy, correction, and forgiveness. And if you carry this trust with fear of Allah rather than pride, with gratitude rather than entitlement, and with vigilance rather than ease, Allah will continue to protect you, purify you, and use you in ways that remain hidden, safe, and blessed beyond what the world can see. But if you neglect this accountability, even the most sincere heart can become susceptible to corruption, and intentions once pure can fade without notice, which is why Allah reminds you gently yet firmly. Liberation is not the destination, obedience is. Awakening others is not the measure of your success. Remaining humble, sincere, and answerable to Allah alone is. And the greatest victories are not those celebrated in the eyes of people, but those quietly sanctioned by Allah, protected by His unseen hand, and nurtured in the hearts of those who have been freed without chaos, ego, or personal gain. And if you internalize this fully, chosen one, you will understand why patience, restraint, sincerity, and vigilance are as essential as action itself, because every soul you awaken, every heart you touch, and every mind you illuminate carries with it a weight of accountability, a divine trust, and a sacred responsibility. And Allah will continue to expand, protect, and purify your role in ways beyond imagination, so long as you remain steadfast, humble, obedient, and fully conscious that all liberation, influence, and awakening flows from Him alone, and your only task is to remain a vessel, a conduit, a witness, and a servant faithful to His will. Chosen one, recognize this sign with calm certainty, spiritual maturity, and unwavering trust in Allah, because what you are witnessing is not confrontation, but conclusion. Their fury is not strength, it is evidence of collapse. For true influence never needs to rage, threaten, intimidate, or obsess. It remains composed, confident, steady, and unbothered, rooted in legitimacy rather than fear. And the moment those who once appeared powerful begin reacting emotionally, escalating narratives, exaggerating threats, rewriting stories, and directing disproportionate attention toward you, it is a clear indication that their authority has already slipped from their hands, because false power only maintains dominance when it is ignored without question, feared without resistance, or obeyed without awareness. But the instant hearts awaken and stop responding the way they once did, panic sets in, and panic always disguises itself as aggression, outrage, hostility, and desperation, which is why their anger feels excessive, irrational, obsessive, and relentless, because they are not fighting you as a person, they are fighting the unbearable realization that people no longer believe them, no longer internalize their narratives, no longer fear their presence, and no longer seek their validation or approval. And this shift terrifies those who built their relevance on controlling perception rather than earning trust, as influence rooted in deception depends entirely on emotional leverage, psychological pressure, and manipulation of fear. And once that leverage disappears, everything begins to unravel internally, causing confusion, infighting, insecurity, and frantic behavior, which then manifests outwardly as attacks, accusations, and noise in a desperate attempt to reassert dominance, regain relevance, and provoke engagement. Yet every outburst only exposes insecurity. Every escalation reveals desperation, and every attack confirms to observers that something essential has already been lost, and Allah allows this fury to surface openly so others can see clearly that those who shout the loudest are often the weakest. and that calm, restraint, patience, and reliance upon Allah are the true signs of strength, stability, and divine backing. And understand this deeply, chosen one. If they still genuinely controlled minds and hearts, they would not need to fixate on you, monitor you, explain you away, or discredit you obsessively. Because secure authority does not chase dissent, it ignores it. But insecurity cannot tolerate silence, cannot endure independence, and cannot coexist with a servant who no longer reacts according to expectation, fear, or conditioning. Which is why their behavior grows more erratic, more reactive, and more unstable as your composure remains intact, your silence remains disciplined, and your trust in Allah remains unshaken. And this contrast becomes a silent verdict witnessed by many, as people intuitively recognize that the one who remains grounded while others spiral is the one supported by truth, clarity, and divine alignment. And Allah turns their fury into a mirror reflecting their decline, because anger reveals attachment, obsession reveals weakness, fixation reveals insecurity, and relentless hostility reveals a complete loss of control. And through this, Allah reassures you that you are not under threat but under protection, for Allah does not allow His sincere servants to be targeted intensely unless something significant has already shifted in the unseen, unless influence has already transferred, and unless hearts have already moved away from falsehood. And history confirms this pattern again and again. When falsehood senses its end, it grows loud, chaotic, reckless, and self-destructive, exposing itself faster than any critic, argument, or exposure ever could. And this is why you must not internalize their anger as a personal burden or misinterpret it as danger, because it is not a measurement of their power, it is a confirmation of its expiration, and your role is not to respond, retaliate, defend, or explain, but to remain steady, grateful, disciplined, and obedient, trusting that Allah is allowing them to exhaust themselves publicly while He secures your position quietly, invisibly, and permanently. For influence granted by Allah does not need defense, justification, or validation. It simply outlasts opposition, survives noise, and endures beyond chaos. And in time, their fury will fade into embarrassment. Their narratives will dissolve into irrelevance. Their credibility will collapse under its own contradictions, and their presence will shrink into silence, while you, if you remain sincere, humble, and anchored in obedience, will continue forward untouched. Not because you defeated them through strategy or force, but because Allah finished their influence the very moment hearts stopped responding to their noise, their fear, and their manipulation. And that, chosen one, is why their rage is not a threat, not a warning, and not a sign to retreat, but a clear divine signal that the chapter has already closed and a new one protected by Allah is already unfolding. Chosen one, reflect deeply on this profound truth and allow it to settle in your heart with clarity. Allah protects those who free souls without spreading chaos, because liberation is not measured by noise, destruction, or visible conquest. It is measured by hearts awakened, minds illuminated, and guidance returned solely to Allah. And the moment you act to liberate others, whether from fear, deception, oppression, or spiritual blindness, you step into a position of immense responsibility, for Allah does not entrust His servants with the lives of others without simultaneously surrounding them with divine protection. Yet that protection is contingent upon sincerity, restraint, and humility. Because those who seek to awaken without humility risk replacing one tyranny with another, and Allah is careful to shield His servants from that trap, guarding them as they operate quietly, persistently, and gently within the limits of His will. And understand this clearly: true liberation never requires shouting, manipulation, or coercion, because hearts cannot be forced to see, and when you guide without spreading chaos, when you illuminate without inciting fear, When you free without creating dependency, Allah's hand covers you invisibly, ensuring that no hidden attack, envy, or plot can truly reach your soul. And this divine safeguarding is not accidental, but a direct response to the alignment between your actions and His pleasure. For those who liberate without arrogance or ego demonstrate to Allah that their intentions remain pure, that their goal is not recognition, revenge, or power, but the elevation of truth and the relief of those previously trapped. And because of this, Allah allows influence to expand exponentially without exposure to harm, for unseen forces cannot penetrate the shield He has placed around sincere hearts. And this protection manifests in countless ways. The right opportunities open at the right time, adversity is softened, enemies' plans collapse silently, and blessings multiply in ways that appear invisible to the world, yet are intensely felt within. And remember this, chosen one, those who attempt to spread liberation through chaos, agitation, or domination often fall into traps of their own making, because Allah does not protect intention when ego dominates, but those who operate in quiet obedience, with patience, wisdom, and humility, are shielded by the unseen, guided to safety, and elevated in a manner that is subtle yet permanent. And through your actions, millions witness a living proof that freedom can be achieved without corruption, influence can expand without aggression, and hearts can be awakened without exploitation. And this pattern repeats through history. Prophets, messengers, and righteous servants who moved people toward Allah without resorting to destruction were always protected, their missions completed despite enemies, obstacles, and worldly dangers. And this principle remains unbroken today, because Allah's laws transcend time and circumstance. And the same divine mechanism that preserved Musa, peace be upon him, in the heart of Pharaoh's court, safeguarded Ibrahim, peace be upon him, in the fire, and shielded the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during the greatest trials of Mecca and Medina, now surrounds those whom Allah uses to awaken souls quietly, without chaos, and with pure intention. And so you must internalize this deeply. Every step you take to illuminate, guide, and liberate must be measured, sincere, and aligned with Allah's pleasure, for protection flows where obedience, humility, and mercy converge. And the more souls you free in this manner, the greater the divine shielding becomes, not as reward for action, but as a covenant of safety for those whom Allah entrusts with responsibility too heavy for human hands alone. And in this way, the one who awakens others without causing chaos becomes untouchable in the unseen, unstoppable in influence, and eternally safeguarded, because Allah Himself is the ultimate guardian of those who act solely for His sake. And this is the profound wisdom behind every trial, every restraint, and every blessing. You are elevated, protected, and multiplied, not because of worldly strategies or force, but because your liberation of souls is aligned perfectly with the divine order, executed with patience, discretion, and mercy, demonstrating that the path to freeing others is not through aggression or disorder, but through obedience, sincerity, and trust in the one who alone controls hearts, outcomes, and destinies. And if you remain steadfast in this path, you will witness miracles in protection, expansion, and unseen support that no one else can comprehend, proving conclusively that Allah protects those who act for His cause alone, moving quietly, liberating purely, and leaving chaos behind. Because the greatest freedom comes not from fighting falsehood with noise, but from surrendering every step, every intention, and every liberation to Allah's infinite wisdom. Chosen one, pause and reflect on this truth. What you have witnessed in these lessons is not a story of coincidence or luck. It is the unfolding of Allah's plan, moving quietly through obedience, patience, and unwavering sincerity. You did not shatter their operations by force, argument, or strategy. You did it by aligning your heart with the truth, by walking in humility, and by trusting Allah when the world seemed loud with chaos. Millions were freed not because of your effort alone, but because Allah placed you as a vessel, a breach, a guiding light for those trapped in darkness, and those who raged, threatened, or resisted are now powerless against what they cannot control. The awakening of hearts. Remember, chosen one, the greatest victories are silent, invisible, and protected. They do not require acknowledgement, applause, or recognition. They require patience, faith, and submission. So continue forward with courage, clarity, and reliance upon Allah. For every soul liberated, every falsehood exposed, and every heart awakened is a testimony of divine justice, and the protection surrounding you is proof that Allah Himself is your shield, guide, and ultimate source of strength. Hold firm, remain humble, stay obedient, and let the light of Allah shine through you, because the world cannot stop what Allah has ordained, and those who witness your steadfastness will see, unmistakably, that truth, sincerity, and divine alignment always prevail.